Hello and welcome to week 4 in the psychology of personality. And we're going to be doing chapters 5 and 6, continuing along our discussion of Freudian's work, but really looking at what happens to Freud's work after he was done. So we have this notion of what neo-Freudian, meaning more modern day applications of Freud's work. Freud's work is alive and well, and there are researchers today who deeply feel that Freud was on the right track with many things. So when we look at the neo-Freudian perspective on personality, I picked out two areas that I think were vital to understanding the whole thing. Read the whole thing, of course, but the two areas that I'm picking up is first, defense mechanisms, which I'm sure you're very aware of some of those. That's in the common everyday vocabulary. And then object relations theory. Excuse me. Defense mechanisms, the discussion, defense mechanisms, according to Freud, are ways and strategies in which the ego, sensing an overwhelming conflict between the superego and the id, deal with it. Now, the common one that we often come across is, of course, denial. Very common one in the literature. And we use that word all the time in the regular general language. When somebody doesn't want to face up to something, we might say, you're in denial. The deep of that is, yes, there's a id impulse and an ego, a superego value system at conflict. And maybe the best way, or maybe the only way I can deal with that, is by denying its existence so that my ego can carry on and not have to face the situation. Now, it's important to recognize that in the Freudian point of view, defenses, including denial and many others, are functional, meaning when somebody's engaged in a defense mechanism, it's an indication that their ego does not have the ego strength to effectively deal with that particular conflict. Therefore, a defense mechanism is put up to defend that person, that ego, from dealing with it. Now, there's other defense mechanisms that reroute that. There's other defense mechanisms that intellectualize. There's other defense mechanisms that blame other people. There's all these, but ultimately they function to protect the individual. In the world of substance abuse in particular, individuals with substance abuse will often experience a great deal of denial, feeling that their problems are not associated with their drinking, but are associated with external factors. And oftentimes, the strategy to deal with that is to break through the denial. I'm not going to necessarily say that that's wrong, but the idea of the defense mechanisms coming from Freudian and neo-Freudian work is that they are there to protect us. Therefore, what Freud did, and what his daughter did, and what other people did, is that when they encountered a defense mechanism, their objective was not to eliminate the defense, it was to build up the ego. And I don't mean building up somebody's ego to make them feel self-important. I mean building up the ego strength by encouraging that individual to put them in a situation where they can face whatever the conflict is more effectively. Breaking through that denial or confronting people, although it does have validity in some situations, is often a blunt instrument. If you break through someone's denial and have them face, the consequences kind of thing, that can be incredibly destructive if the person's ego doesn't have the strength to deal with it. So we want to understand defense mechanisms at that level. We have all encountered the frustration it is when somebody's using a defense mechanism. you're having an argument with somebody and they get all intellectual about it. Or you have an individual that regardless of what goes wrong, they're always blaming their boss, or they're always blaming the cops, or they're always blaming, these are very frustrating. At the same time, there are individuals that deal with their frustrations by channeling their work into creative efforts or by helping to problem solving and understanding. There's a whole bunch of very, very positively framed defense mechanisms such as creativity and problem solving and dealing with the situation, venting out the anger and frustration so you're better able and equipped to deal with the conflict that's in front of you. All kinds of ways, and they're all under the umbrella of defense mechanisms. So you getting familiar with those, you can understand what are the, hate to use the word function again, but what are the more functional defense mechanisms, the more adaptive defense mechanisms, and what are the ones that really avoid the problem and can become perpetual. And the key to those things is not always confrontation. Sometimes it's working maybe long term on the ego to bring it up and to help that person have the strength to actually face the consequences of their actions. That's the discussion. In the quiz, I actually have you look at object relations theory. Now, object relations really stems from an idea that Freud brought on that said that we look for attachment. We look for attachment with our caregivers. We look for attachment with the objects around us. We develop emotional connections with the world around us. And dead on, we do. We have favorite people and we have favorite things. But sometimes what can happen, let's say I use the character of Linus in the Peanut strip. Linus had a security blanket. Now, without getting into the whole psychology of what the Van Pelt, that's his last name, family dysfunction or whatever. But here we have Linus, an intellectual kid growing up in a home, and he feels insecure and he's attached to this blanket that is a source of his security. Now, it might indicate to a psychologist that he's not getting a sense of security and a sense of self from his parents. He's certainly not getting it from his sister Lucy, who constantly is on his back about, being imperfect and not being up to snuff. And let alone later in the series, we have that they have another kid called a Rerun, and Linus's younger brother, who is also subject to the torments of the older sister. And so we have this idea that he connects to something. It becomes very important to him, that security blanket, as an example of the things that we reach out in order to provide us with safety and security. The blanket, it's a warming thing. It's soft, it's cuddling, it's responsive. He can wrap himself with it. I mean, the whole strip is characterizes how Linus uses that blanket in many, many different ways to protect himself from other people and negative feelings. Freud's work looks at how we attach to things, in particular people, but also to objects. And that throughout life, our attachment moves. In fact, his developmental theory, the classic stage theory that's, the oral, anal, phallic stage kind of thing, that's all that where all the sexuality sort of came out, was comes from this, is the root of this object relations theory, is that we're looking for ways to focus our attention and feel like we just got born into the world and we have this need to connect. And the stages of psychosexual development that Freud talks about are actually reflective of neurological development in our bodies. I mean, kids put things in their mouth and they explore the world with their mouth because the neurons in their mouth are much more developed than the sensations in their hands. There's a cephalocaudal development of neurological systems in the body. Cephalo meaning the head, caudal meaning the tail, so head to tail, their face is full of neurons and remains so for much of our life. Our face is very, very sensitive. And then it's not till later that we develop sensation in our hands and other parts of our bodies. And Freud's theory follows that sequence of neurological development, and those become erogenous zones, meaning they're a focus of attachment where that energy goes. There's some whole readings on that about what Freud meant by that and how it relates to object relations theory. Now, object relations theory in its modern sort of rendition really might be something useful to address than when we've attached ourselves to someone who's really bad for us. You think about that kind of sense. You probably know people, maybe you've been there, maybe you are there, that there's this individual in your life that you're deeply attached to who is not good for you. But yet that desire to be with that person for whatever reason, to fix them or whatever, is very, very strong. And that really has a lot to do with the work of object relations theory. At least that's one way to address that particular thing. We might have a deep attachment to our job. We might have a deep attachment to our pets. Might have a deep, and understanding that whole concept of forming attachments, enjoying those attachments, and then having those attachments go away. When we lose our job, when we retire, when we have pets that die, each one of these is a challenge to the self as it deals with loss of an object of attachment. Very, very, very cool stuff for self-analysis, and also as a point of addressing some of the challenges we have in the human experience. Now we move into chapter 6, and before we get into any, let's eliminate all the adolescent giggling that might go on. Like Karen Horney is how you pronounce that name. We'll leave it at that. Karen Horney came up, the discussion A has to do with her work where she looks at personality types. These are, I would almost say, personality states, or 3 states of our personality. We can be in a compliant state, we can be in an aggressive state, and we can be in a detached state. Now, I like this theory because it's sort of like, I look at, when I look at my traits or I look at my types, these are personality theories we're going to get in, but I can take my personality type and engage in a situation aggressively or detached or compliant, just going along. I don't care. Or I'm good. Like, compliance doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to go along with it because I'm forced to. It means that's okay with me. So it's sort of like the applied sense of a personality in this kind of thing. And there's probably times where you've still been you and you've made a decision. You come up to a particular situation like, I'm not going to fight this. I'm going to go along. I don't have any issue. Or maybe I'm in full agreement. I'm going to go on with this. Other times, no, I'm going to fight this. I don't agree with this. Might call that aggressive. And then we call the other ones are detached. Maybe that's the I don't care. Or I'm not even going to get involved in this decision. And I'm not even really going to let that be a part of my life. So talk about some instances of where you've found yourself in situations where you've made the choice between compliance, aggression, and detachment. The other discussion has to do with Erich Fromm's work. Now, Erich Fromm, you probably need to read his original work. He's a brilliant, absolutely brilliant survivor of the Holocaust, and he talks about the essence of human freedom, sort of human willpower kind of thing. And he talks about, and this is deep philosophy, but interesting to think about, oftentimes we envision freedom as the ability to do anything we want. And yet, within Fromm's work, plenty of historical examples, and certainly within many religions, that personal discipline and the ability to not do things always just the way we want because we are responding to a higher calling or to a moral obligation is actually more of an expression of freedom than what he would call a hedonistic, self-motivating, all for me sort of perspective. Now, these are, of course, extremes, but within discipline, Fromm finds freedom. And so possibly we can look at the idea, and we'll keep this at a personal level. I don't think it's appropriate for us to look at somebody else and say they would be better if they weren't so free to do anything they want. I think that that's not the point. So let's reserve our discussions to, here's a thing that I can do, here's a situation which I can do whatever I want, but I probably need to be a little bit more disciplined. I would talk about my eating. I can buy food that I want. I can go out to eat when I want. I eat too much. There's too much freedom. I would actually would love to have an individual in my life who told me what to eat. I would like that control over my life and just set out the food. I don't have access to food. They'd come up every once in a while, the snack, here's your snack. And it's only 3 grapes. I can't have a 4th grape. That kind of ability to structure that part, because the freedom is not net. The freedom for me to eat whatever I want, whenever I want, is not good for me. So how do disciplines come in where we see that maybe having freedom to do whatever we want is not necessarily good? Now, again, I want to keep this from getting into pointing fingers at, certainly we can see in social media, or, should presidents say certain things, or what about all the bad stuff that we see on the internet and Twitter and all that stuff? Let's keep it personal, just self-exploratory about, is there sometimes I should be less free because it would be better for me? And by having that discipline, I would experience a sense of freedom. Freedom from the chains of addiction, or, the chains of impulse, that there's actually a freedom in that. That's kind of what Fromm was talking about. In the quiz, we return to Horney's work about motivation for perfection, ambition, and triumph. And I want you to share with me your own personal goals and motivations related to these. Now, of course, perfection is, I would certainly advise ourselves and advise others that we don't want to always strive for perfection. But, hey, why not? I'm a Christian, and Jesus was perfect, right? So I strive for that, knowing I'll never even come close, ever. That doesn't mean the goal isn't there. So you may have a religious conviction, or you may have a conviction to be, that your papers are going to be perfect, or you're going to be the perfect parent. As long as you understand it's not going to happen, it can still strive to that. You can still shoot for it, knowing that you may fall short. The same with ambition and triumph. There's things that you want to do, goals that you have, ambitions that you want to have. How do these shape your life? How do they become the driving points in your personality? And certainly when we think about people's goals, what they want to win, what they want to accomplish, what they want to be really good at, kind of covering these things, that shapes a lot of how we experience people in the real world. But we actually use those as a very ambitious person would be a way that we would describe somebody's personality. So let's take a look at these things in ourselves, find examples like that in our goals and motivations. So whole bunch of ways to go here, a bunch of information coming in about personality with the Neo-Freudian, and then looking in Karen Horney and Erich Fromm. I would really, really encourage you to do extra reading with Erich Fromm. Find I didn't prepare this, so there's a book that has freedom in the title. and Escape from Freedom or something like that he wrote, which is a pretty old book, but it's a core book of philosophy and psychology and society. So great book to read. And so that's it for this week. Have a great time in these discussions. I look forward to hearing what you have to say about defense mechanisms and getting into the personality types and this whole deep philosophy about too much freedom can be chains. Ooh, that'll be a good one. All right, so I'll see you this week and have a great week.